Amidst the aftermath of the Vietnam War, grappling with racial tensions and navigating the tumultuous political landscape of Watergate, the residents of the nation's capital strive to maintain a semblance of normalcy. Yet, amidst the backdrop of everyday life, there were those who met tragic fates. Join us on this episode of DMV Crime Watch as we dive into the unsolved mysteries that plagued Washington, D.C. during the tumultuous 1970s. In the wake of the Vietnam War, Washington, D.C. became more than just the nation's capital. It became a battleground for ideals, a canvas for protests, and a refuge for those scarred by conflict. As the war raged abroad, the city's residents felt its effects at home, with streets echoing the chants of protesters and the footsteps of returning veterans. In the aftermath of the Civil Rights Movement, Washington, D.C. found itself at a critical juncture in the fight for racial equality. While significant strides had been made in advancing civil rights legislation and dismantling segregation, the city continued to grapple with deep-rooted racial tensions and systemic inequalities. With the unlocking of Watergate, Washington, D.C. grappled with questions of trust, transparency, and the integrity of its institutions. The scandal served as a sobering reminder of the fragility of democracy and the importance of holding those in power accountable for their actions. Yet, it also demonstrated the resilience of the American system of government and the capacity of the people to demand justice in the face of corruption and the abuse of power. We will now jump into our episode of DMV Crime Watch, where we cover cold cases based out of Washington, D.C. that remain unsolved from the 1970s. Washington, D.C., like many states across the U.S., would see an uptick in crime, which was contributed to the divide of social inequalities, racial tensions, drug epidemics, and the decline of urban areas. D.C. especially would see a rise in gang violence and drug-related crimes over areas and disputes leading in robbery, assault, and homicides across the city. Law enforcement agencies in Washington, D.C., including the Metropolitan Police Department, MPD, faced significant challenges in addressing the rise of crime. Budgeting constraints, staffing shortages, and competing priorities strained the resources and capabilities of law enforcement, making it extremely difficult to effectively combat crime and ensure public safety. But with those efforts, D.C. would see a record number of homicides and an uptick in crime, and many of those cases during the 1970s still remain unsolved today. August 14th, 1971. For over 30 years, the suspect responsible in a case that took the life of a man and left him in his car for workers to find him the next morning has been able to remain in the shadows. Help us find the suspect and finally solve this case. August 14th, 1971. For over 30 years, the suspect responsible in a case that took the life of a man and left him in his car for workers to find him the next morning has been able to remain in the shadows. Help us find the suspect and finally solve this case. Around 9:40 a.m., detectives and medical examiners will be called out to the Columbia Island Marina, which is located near the Pentagon on George Washington Memorial Parkway in Arlington, Virginia. At the scene, they would find a man parked in his car, shot inside of his vehicle. That man was Ralph Edward Kmetz. Ralph would work as a court recorder in D.C., and to this day, we are unsure if he may have been meeting someone out there or this was just a crime of opportunity. But someone may have tips that can finally help us get this case solved and help justice be served for Ralph and the Kmetz family. September 18th, 1973. The strong man was lost in D.C., and he would never make it back home. People are unsure if he ever made it to the competition that he was expected to leave from DC to head to. And today, he still remains missing. Paul Rehus is a bodybuilder from the Los Angeles area. He was headed to DC by plane on September the 16th to see a friend in 1973. And after that, he was supposed to head to New York for a bodybuilder competition. But he wouldn't make it. And the last time he was seen was in DC when he was able to visit his friend, which did confirm that he was able to see him in DC. Paul was expected to arrive back in LA on September 20th of 1973, as one of his friends was supposed to pick him up from the airport, and when he didn't arrive, his friend would report him missing. One of the very strange things about this case is that Paul is someone that you wouldn't be able to miss. He was a very large man with a very strong build. What happened to him? Did you see him around DC? Were you able to see him in New York? Do you know if he made it to the bodybuilder competition? Paul is a white male, 5'8", 185 pounds, with brown hair and brown eyes. While the last time he was seen in DC, there may be clues that are still left in the capital. If you have any tips, please contact the Los Angeles Police Department. December 14th, 1974. A young woman would be reported missing and unfortunately later found deceased. But DNA could be the break in the case of an 18-year-old's life taken way too soon. Eileen Kelly, 18. She would work at the Department of Justice as a secretary, and it would be right before the holiday, and she wanted to make a purchase for a new car. She would go ahead and contact her father, who would help her with the purchase. So she said that she would meet up with her father by catching a bus for her future car purchase, but she would never arrive. When her father noticed that she didn't arrive for the car purchase, he went ahead and contacted the police, and a missing persons report was immediately filed. And just days before the holiday, on December 22nd of 1974, police would receive news for a body found in a wooded area. The body was later identified as Eileen Kelly's, who was found murdered, actually assaulted. She was also strangled with a pair of stockings that she was wearing. The suspect in this case has been able to hide their identity, but with help of DNA, the identity may be known sooner than later. Bodily fluids were left at the crime scene, and scientists were able to recover them, connect them through the FBI database, and also retrieve a result. Authorities also question if other women were victims from the same suspect, and soon will know through DNA, help bring them justice, and bring a name to the person responsible. But in the meantime, while investigators continue to search for a suspect, tips in this case can help the Metropolitan Police Department and bring us justice for Eileen. November 23rd, 1976. Police will be called to the 1000 block of Newton Street for a shooting. At the scene, police will find our victim, Bernard Peebles, deceased from gunshot wounds. Bernard earned a PhD and was also a sergeant in the Army. He was awarded a Bronze Star and British Empire Medal, and he was shot and killed outside of his home the week of Thanksgiving. Detectives are unsure if this was a crime of opportunity or if he was robbed by someone who knew him. The mystery remains unknown, and so does the suspect. The suspect took a man away who lived his life in honor, dedicating his life to his country, education, as he worked at a university, and also writing publications. Maybe you knew who did it then and were afraid to come forward at the time. As time has passed, maybe you have the courage to do the right thing now and speak up. September 19th, 1978. A taxi driver would be found murdered in his vehicle after picking up a customer that was later found out to be a suspect in his case. Lloyd Dudley Jones, 31. He would work as a taxi driver in the DC area, and he would be working that evening when he was a victim of a robbery. He would be found shot in his taxi at 5:55 p.m. on the 1100 block of 2nd Street Northeast. Who was the suspect inside his taxi that took Lloyd's life? Could anyone have seen the suspect running away that evening and just may have seen something that they don't know was super important in this case that day? Lloyd was making a living for himself and had a passenger in his vehicle who he thought would be taking it to a destination. Instead, this person would take his life. And that suspect still remains on the loose and has not received any time for this crime. As we conclude this episode of the DMV Crime Report, we're reminded of the unresolved mysteries that linger in the shadows of our nation's capital. These 5 cases from the 1970s remain unsolved, leaving families and communities searching for answers. But our work doesn't end here. We need your help to bring closure to these cases and deliver justice for the victims and their loved ones. If you have any information about any of these or any other unresolved crimes, we urge you to contact the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department or your local law enforcement agency. Even the smallest tip could make a difference. And remember, by subscribing to our channel, you'll stay updated on the latest development in these cases and others like them. Together, we can shine a light on the darkness and work towards a safer, more just community. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay safe.